I'm a scarlet man in love with one of my clients. Wait, you're buying me? There were a million other things I could have said to him, or perhaps it would have been better if I said nothing. I mean, what could I possibly say that could convey the storm within me to him? Unlike my mind, the room was quiet, except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. I stood there, heart pounding, watching Silas. He wasn't like the others. He never was. No leering glances, no hands roaming where they didn't belong. Just warmth. The kind I didn't know how to deal with. But tonight was something different. The way he looked at me, steady, sure, made my chest ache in ways I didn't understand. And then he said it. I've bought out your contract. My breath hitched. My throat tightened. You're buying me? I repeated myself. The contract in itself was proof enough, but I wanted to hear it from his lips. Silas shook his head, his sharp green eyes softening, and what he said next was the last thing I ever expected. No, Jeremy, I'm setting you free. Free. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Freedom wasn't something I thought about. It wasn't for people like me. It was a dream, faded and distant, like the faces of the parents I barely remember. I managed a shaky laugh, though it sounded more like a sob. Free? I don't even know what that means. Silas stepped closer, his voice low and steady, like he knew how fragile I felt. It means you don't belong to them. Not to anyone, not to me. You're your own person now. My legs buckled and I sank onto the edge of the bed. My chest felt heavy, my head spinning. Could I believe him? Could I let myself? Freedom. I rolled the word around in my mind, on my tongue. It felt foreign, like a language I'd never learned to speak. Tears blurred my vision. I wasn't sure if I was happy or terrified. Maybe both. Why? I whispered. Why would you do this? Silas knelt before me, his gaze steady. Because you deserve it. 17 years ago. The storm was so loud that night. Thunder boomed, and I hugged my stuffed bunny tighter. Don't worry, Buster, I whispered, stroking his ear. It's just a noise. Jeremy, sweetheart, put on your shoes. Mom's voice called from the kitchen. I padded over, dragging Buster along. Why? I asked, confused. Mom was rushing around, pulling her coat on. The storm's getting bad, and the power's out. We're going to stay with Aunt May for the night. Dad came in, shaking his head. We'll be fine here, Anna. Just a storm. It's not safe, Mom snapped. The radio said there's a flood nearby. Dad sighed, grabbing his keys. Fine, let's go. The car was cold and smelled like wet leaves. I climbed into the back seat, clutching Buster as Mom bumped me in. Why do we have to go? I asked again. Mom turned to me, her smile shaky. Just to be safe, honey. It's an adventure. The rain was so heavy on the windshield that it looked like the world was melting. I watched the wipers switch back and forth, my eyes getting heavy. Then it happened. Watch out! Mom screamed. The car swerved and everything tilted. There was a loud crash, glass shattering, and I felt Buster fly out of my hands. When I opened my eyes, the car was upside down. Mom? Dad? I whimpered. Jeremy. Mom's voice was weak. I saw her reaching for me, her face bloody. It's okay, baby. You're okay. Dad was a movie. I'm scared, I cried, my chest hurting from the seatbelt. I know, sweetheart, Mom whispered. Her hand fell, and she didn't say anything else. I screamed her name until my voice broke, but she didn't answer. About 2 months later, Uncle and Aunt have been fighting a lot lately. They didn't try to keep their voices down. Most nights, I'd hide under the blanket, pressing my hands to my ears. I didn't like when grown-ups yelled. It reminded me, well, of everything. But tonight was different. Their shouting was louder than ever, and I could hear things slamming. Maybe plates? I was in my little corner of the living room, hugging my stuffed rabbit, when Uncle suddenly grabbed my coat. "Come on, Jeremy," he said, his voice tight but not angry like Aunt's. "Let's go for a drive." I thought maybe he wanted to cheer me up. He even got me a lollipop from the gas station. It was grape flavored, my favorite. When we pulled in front of his old, crumbling building, he smiled for the first time that day. "Wait here, buddy. I'm gonna grab us more candy." I nodded, clutching the sticky lollipop in one hand and my rabbit in the other. He walked off, disappearing into the rain. I waited like he told me to. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sky grew darker and the rain heavier. My coat was soaked, and I was shivering. I kept telling myself, Uncle will be back any second, and he wouldn't leave me here. But he didn't come back. I was tired and scared. My nose was running, and my hand felt heavy. The lollipop was long gone, the stick sogging in my hand. I didn't have the energy to cry. Then the door to the building creaked open, and a lady with the kind eyes peeked out. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here all alone?" I couldn't even answer. She wrapped a warm blanket around me and carried me inside. I felt safe for the first time in forever, but all I could think about was why Uncle didn't come back. Why didn't he want me? 7 years later. The orphanage was supposed to be a safe place. That's what they told me when the kind lady took me in. But they lied. I've been here 7 years. 7 years of stale bread and watery soup that barely satiated my hunger. 7 years of kids bigger than me taking my blanket in winter and shoving me to the ground just because they could. 7 years of adults turning away, pretending they didn't see the bruises or hear me crying at night. By the time I was 13, I'd stopped crying. It didn't help anyway. "Jeremy!" Miss Ruth's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her sharp eyes narrowing me. "Get in here! Now!" I shuffled in, already bracing for whatever punishment was coming. Maybe she found out I took an extra bread yesterday. I didn't care. I was too hungry to feel bad about it. But when I stepped into her office, two strangers were waiting. A man in a suit and a woman with too much makeup smiles at me like I was some kind of prize. "Is this him?" the man asked. Miss Ruth nodded. "He's a good worker, obedient." I frowned, confused. What's going on? The woman crouched down, her smile too sweet, too fake. "You're going somewhere new, Jeremy. A place where you'll be taken care of." Taken care of? That didn't sound right. I don't want to go," I said, stepping back. Miss Ruth grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "It's not up to you." They dragged me to their car, and as the orphanage disappeared behind us, my stomach twisted. I didn't know where I was going, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be good. I was right. 8 years later. I stopped counting the days after a while. They all blurred together, different faces, same filthy touches. Men of all kinds came through those doors. The ones who liked to whisper sweet lies, and the ones who didn't bother hiding how much they enjoyed hurting me. I hated them all. The first few months I fought, I kicked, screamed, bit anyone who got too close. They locked me in a room without food or water until I learned my place. When I turned 18, I thought it'd be over. I was an adult, wasn't I? I could leave and start over. I tried to run away once. They caught me before I even got to the city limits. The beating they gave me left me in bed for a week. After that, I stopped running. For a while, I thought about other ways out, the kind no one could stop. I even held a knife to my wrist once, But then they told me about him, my uncle, the man who left me at the orphanage when I was 6, who never looked back. He had a new family now, a baby boy. He'd make a fine addition here, wouldn't he? The madam said with a smirk. We could keep him close to you, give you some company. I felt sick. My uncle didn't deserve anything from me, but his kid? A baby? No one deserved this life. I won't run again, I said, my voice shaking. Just leave him out of it. They made me sign some paper. I couldn't read it, but I knew enough to understand what it meant. If I tried to leave, I owed them more money than I could ever make. So now I stay. I smile when I'm supposed to and do what I'm told. I've stopped fighting because fighting doesn't change anything. This is my life now. I hate every second of it, but at least I know that little boy won't end up here. That's the only thing that keeps me going. 2 years later, the day he walked in here for the first time, I thought he'd be like all the others. Men like him, charming, polished, with sharp suits and easy smiles. They were always the worst. They hid their ugliness behind pretty faces. I stood by the door, my arms crossed, bracing myself. So, I said, keeping my voice flat, how do you want me? His green eyes flickered to me, and for a second, something softened in his face. He sat down in his chair by the window, like he wasn't in a brothel by some fancy lounge. Actually, he said, his voice low and warm, I was hoping we could just talk. That threw me off. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Talk? He nodded, leaning back like he had all the time in the world. Yeah, conversation, companionship. You know, the stuff humans do. I didn't trust him. Men didn't come here to talk. You paid for an hour, I said stiffly. You sure you want to waste it like that? He smiled, and it wasn't sleazy or mocking, just kind. What's your name? I hesitated. Jeremy. I'm Silas, he said. Nice to meet you, Jeremy. The way he said my name, it wasn't rough or demanding. It sounded normal, like I wasn't just something he paid for. I stayed standing, arms wrapped around myself, unsure what to do. He kept talking though, asked about my favorite food, if I'd ever seen the ocean, little things like that. I didn't give him much, just nodded or shrugged, waiting for him to slip up, show his true colors. But he didn't. The hour passed, and when he left, I was still waiting. As the door closed behind him, I stood there confused. For the first time, I wasn't angry or disgusted, just curious. Who comes to a place like this just to talk? A few months later, Silas started coming back once a week, then twice. By the third visit, I'd stopped waiting for him to act like the others. He never did. He'd walk in, always with that same smile, and sit by the window like he belonged there. How's my favorite conversationalist today? He'd ask, and I rolled my eyes even though it made my chest feel warm. You're wasting your money, I tell him. You know that, right? Maybe I just like good company. Good company. That's what he called me. No one had ever said that before. We'd sit and talk about everything and nothing. Silas had stories for days, places he'd been, people he'd met, dreams he had. He asked me a few questions too, but not the prying kind, just curious. What's one thing you'd do if you could do anything? He asked one night. I laughed bitterly. Get out of here. He didn't laugh with me. He just nodded like he understood. Where would you go? I don't know, somewhere far, somewhere quiet. He smiled. Sounds nice. For those few hours, the walls didn't feel so suffocating. I forgot the bruises, the shame, the chains tying me to this place. Silas never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. He treated me like I was a person. It scared me at first, but then it became safe. The others noticed. Madam teased me about my special client. Some of the other boys laughed, calling me Silas's pet. I didn't care. Because for the first time in years, I had something to look forward to. Silas was my escape, the only bright spot in this dark, filthy world. But I knew it wouldn't last. Nothing good ever did. 6 months later. It was a slow night when Silas came in, later than usual. I could tell something was different the second I saw him, the way his eyes lingered on me, softer somehow, like he was seeing more than just surface. Rough day? I asked, sitting across from him. Something like that, he said, running a hand through his dark hair. You make it better, though. I froze, my chest tightened, and I didn't know what to say. No one talked to me like that. I tried to brush it off. Don't get all sappy on me now. I mean it, Jeremy. His voice was quiet but firm. I look forward to this, to you. I laughed nervously, looking anywhere but him. You're just saying that because you're paying me to sit here. His expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he was mad, but then he leaned forward, his green eyes locking onto mine. I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be. Something in my chest cracked. For a second, I let myself wonder. Maybe he meant it. Maybe someone like him could care about someone like me. But then reality slammed back. No, that's not how this worked. I forced a smile, leaning back in my chair. Well, lucky for you, I'm good at making people feel special. His face fell slightly, and guilt twisted in my stomach. I couldn't let myself believe it. Silas was a client. He paid to be here, just like all the others, and when he got bored, he'd leave. No one loved someone like me, and no one could. I was tainted, broken, unworthy of anything real. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. So, what do you want to talk about tonight? Silas hesitated, like he wanted to say something, but then he just smiled back. Anything you want. And just like that, I reminded myself of the rules. Silas wasn't mine, and I wasn't his. 3 months later. Silas was quieter than usual tonight. He sat across from me, fingers tracing the rim of his glass, his green eyes distant. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I need to tell you something, he said, finally breaking the silence. Yeah? I asked, keeping my tone light, even though my heart started pounding. I'm leaving, he said, looking right at me. In a month. For another country. The words hit me like a punch. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to smile. That's great. Might be a big opportunity for you. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to read me. Jeremy, stop. I know you're not happy about this. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Why wouldn't I be? You deserve better than this place. Come with me. My breath caught. What? I want you to come with me, he said, leaning forward, his voice steady, but full of something raw. You don't belong here. You never have. Let me take you away from this. I stared at him, the temptation almost unbearable, to leave, to finally be free, more than free, to be with someone who cared about me. But the reality was louder than dreams. I can't, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why not? Sal's voice was sharp now. You've told me 100 times you hate it here. You want to leave. I love you, Jeremy. I want you to be with me. Why do you keep rejecting this, rejecting me? His words tore through me. Love? No, he couldn't mean that. Not for someone like me. Maybe, I said. My voice was brittle. I like having a parade of men in my room. You alone wouldn't do it for me. Silas's face darkened, and before I could react, he crossed the room and kissed me, hard. It wasn't like any kiss I'd ever had. There was anger in it, yes, but also something deeper. Love. And for the first time, I didn't flinch or pull away. When he broke the kiss, his voice was low but firm. That's the first lie you've ever told me. If you don't want me, say it. But don't rip my heart out like this. He turned and left, leaving me alone in the quiet, my heart aching for someone I was too scared to reach for. 15 days later, I hadn't seen Silas in weeks. I told myself I'd move on, that I wasn't waiting for him, but every time the door opened, I couldn't stop my heart from hoping. So when it was him, standing there with something in his hands, I froze. It took me so much more than a moment to register that he was truly there. "These are for you," he said, handing me a stack of papers. I stared at them, my stomach twisting. I didn't have to read to know what they were. The weight of them, the look in his eyes, it was all too familiar. What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've bought you out of your contract." My breath hitched. My throat tightened. You're buying me?" He stepped closer, taking my hand in his. My grip was firm, steady, as if he was angering me. "No, Jeremy, I'm setting you free." The word hit me like a punch. Free. It felt like foreign, like it didn't belong in my world. "Why?" I croaked, not trusting my voice. His green eyes softened, and he smiled. That same kind smile I didn't think I deserved. "Because I love you, and even if you don't want me, I can't leave you like this." My breath hitched. "You don't belong to them anymore. You don't belong to me or anyone else. From now on, Jeremy, you belong to yourself and yourself alone." The tears came before I could stop them, big, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. Years of pain, anger, and hopelessness poured out of me, and I couldn't hold it back. Silas didn't say a word. He just pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was something precious. When the tears finally slowed, I felt drained, empty, but lighter somehow. Silas let me go and handed me another paper and a small key. "The key is to a single apartment. It's yours for as long as you want it." "The paper," he hesitated, his voice soft. "It's a plane ticket. The seat next to mine. I leave in 15 days. If you decide to join me, I'll be the happiest man alive. If not, I'll be happy knowing you chose what you wanted as a free man." He leaned down, kissed my forehead, and left, leaving me holding my future in my hands. A week later, the apartment was small, but it felt massive to me. For the first time, the space was mine, just mine. No locks on the doors to keep me in, no shadows lurking in the corners. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and I wasn't sure if I liked it or not. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't have a schedule, no clients to see, no madam barking orders at me. I spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the city, trying to figure out what it meant to be free. Some things were amazing, like cooking my own meals, even if I burnt half of them, or sleeping in a bed that wasn't shared with strangers. I could take walks when no one was watching or following me, but it was strange too. I'd wake up that night, my heart racing, expecting someone to come bursting in. The silence felt like it was pressing down on me, and the freedom, it was too overwhelming. I didn't know what to do, how to live without someone telling me how to exist. And then there was Silas. I couldn't stop thinking about him. His voice, his smile, the way he looked at me, like I was someone worth saving. I'd sit on the couch, holding the plane ticket he left me, and wonder if he was thinking about me too. But then I remembered the way he held me when I cried, the way he told me I belonged to myself now, and for the first time I let myself think maybe he was right. Maybe I did. 6 days later, the apartment was quiet, too quiet. As I sat on the edge of my bed, the plane ticket was on the nightstand, staring at me like it had all the answers. Silas's flight was tomorrow. By this time tomorrow, he'd be gone. I ran my fingers through my hair, my chest tight with confusion. I wanted to go with him. God, I wanted so badly. But the idea of it terrified me. What if I was a burden? What if he regretted taking me along? Silas said he loved me, but love didn't mean forever. The last people I loved were my parents, and they left me. Silas could leave me too. And if he did, I wasn't sure I'd survive it. But he was leaving now anyway. Wouldn't it be better to have whatever time I could with him, no matter how short? Then there was the other question, the one that haunted me the most. Did I deserve it? Silas's love, his kindness, his belief in me. I didn't know if I was worth any of it. My head was spinning, my chest heavy, exhausted. I finally lay down, still thinking about him, and at some point, I faded into sleep. The next morning, I woke up in a panic, the light streaming through the window, hitting me like a slap. My heart dropped as I checked the clock. Silas's flight was leaving soon. Too soon. No, 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 I muttered, grabbing the plane ticket from the nightstand and stumbling into my slippers. There was no time to think, no time to change. I threw on a hoodie over my nightclothes and ran out the door. The taxi ride was a nightmare. The driver wasn't in a hurry, and traffic felt like it was mocking me. My hands shook as I clutched the ticket, silently begging every stoplight to turn green. When I finally got to the airport, I bolted inside, breathless and frantic. Security was a blur of questions and stern faces. Maybe it was the way I looked, messy hair, pajama pants, and slippers, but they didn't make it easy. Still, I fought through, desperation driving me forward, and then I saw him. Silas, standing by the check-in counter, calm and compressed, his green eyes scanning the crowd. I tried to push through, but security stopped me. "You can't go in there!" So I did the only thing I could. I screamed, "Silas!" He turned, his eyes locking onto mine across the distance. Everything else faded, the noise, the people, the chaos. It was just him. He rushed toward me, his face lighting up with disbelief and something else. Something I hadn't dared to hope for. When he reached me, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me. Hard and desperate. "You came." His voice thick with emotion. His eyes were almost teary. "You came." I laughed, breathless. Of course I came. Before I could lose my nerve, I dropped to one knee, holding his hand tightly. "Silas, the man I am is because of you. The freedom I have is because of you. Will you do me the honor of sharing that freedom with me?" Silas broke out into sob as he pulled to my feet. "Yes," he said, over and over before kissing me again, the whole airport disappearing around us. For the first time, everything felt right. Silas helped me through the boarding process, holding my hand the entire time. I'd never been on a plane before. When we took off, I couldn't believe it. I was in the sky, free like a bird. It wasn't until we landed that I realized where we were going. Italy. I never thought to check the ticket. Italy was more beautiful than I could have imagined, with its colorful streets, breathtaking views, and food that made my mouth water. Silas and I moved into a cozy apartment. For the first time, life didn't feel like survival. It felt like living. Now, I'm thinking about enrolling in a diploma course. I want to be educated, to do something meaningful with my life, because for the first time, I believe I can. And with Silas by my side, I know I no longer have anything to be worried about. The end. Do you think everyone deserves to be loved? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our rainbow force, and stay wholesome.